Our presentation talks about Ponzi schemes. We will discuss the legal side of Ponzi schemes along with the elements that make up what a Ponzi scheme actually consists of. Bernie Madoff will be our example. The introduction, basically Ponzi schemes are a really big ordeal when it comes to fraud. Luckily, or I guess fortunately for us as an example, our generation has witnessed one of the largest Ponzi schemes in history. That refers to Bernie Madoff. The legal issues that are involved in a Ponzi scheme are very rigorous and drawn out. In other words, the actual time spent in a courtroom, the investigation is very in-depth. The events of a Ponzi scheme normally take place with involve rich people because you need money to invest into these schemes, and the outcome normally is very negative for them. What is a Ponzi scheme? A Ponzi scheme is basically just a form of fraud. The way that Bernie Madoff did his thing, and this is the way an actual Ponzi scheme works, you gain investors' trust, and you provide them with very good returns. Thus, you gain even more investors. Basically, it consists of a non-existing enterprise, which means in the long run there's no returns. So basically, it just doesn't work out well for anybody other than the person behind the whole scheme.
We will now discuss the history of the Ponzi schemes. The name was originated from Charles Ponzi. Ponzi was an immigrant from Italy. In 1919 1920, he managed to trick people into buying millions of dollars worth of postage stamps. Ponzi told people if you buy these European stamps for a set price, you could then go to America and sell them for a... The most important part of a Ponzi scheme is that you promise your investor the return of money in a short amount of time. Ponzi promised 50% return within 90 days.
Bernie Madoff grew up in Queens, New York. He was a very smart person as a kid, and he brought that into college as he started trading stock out of his apartment. He was able to complete trades in as little as 3 days, while other stockbrokers took up to 3 weeks. He was one of the first 5 brokers to join the NASDAQ in 1971, which is a major deal, and it made him a very respectable stock trader. This is basically a breakdown of what Bernie Madoff did to start his Ponzi scheme and basically the elements that were in it. Madoff was a very well-known investor, as I said before, and this really helped him convince thousands of investors to just put loads of money in his hands, and which basically made him a large amount of profits. The way that Madoff got away with most of this, or the way a Ponzi scheme actually works, is he would use his new investors' money to pay off his old investors, which would basically give them the returns they were looking for, and that would disguise their debt as return, and the new investors would not get paid basically until other investors came. So it'd have to be a constant cycle of new investors. Whatever money was left over after he paid off those old investors would go right into his pocket. The fact that Madoff was such a respectable investor helped him slide under the radar for so long.
After making a really good amount of money, Bernie Madoff finally admitted to his Ponzi scheme and said he first began his fraud in the early 1990s. He was brought up on 11 counts of fraud, money laundering, perjury, and theft. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 150 years. Madoff was denied bail because the judge pretty much thought that he had the incentive and the means to flee and get away. And Madoff was 70 years old at the time of his verdict. These are the legal issues regarding a Ponzi scheme. A Ponzi scheme is a fraudulent money-making operation, and it falls under a form of criminal fraud. And this type of crime is usually committed by the use of verbal word that the money will be made, but instead it's just getting money from more investors to pay off the old ones, and it turns into a direct theft from the original investor and the ones that keep investing. The outcome of a Ponzi scheme never ends well because you can't get out of the cycle of getting more and more investors unless you can flee the country and just never contact them again. But the actual crime is committed on different levels of business, but major Ponzi schemes require large amounts of money to be invested into the operation. Madoff was a great example of a major Ponzi operation. Unfortunately, his billion-dollar operation soon had to come to an end, and Madoff received the full penalty for his actions, which mostly fell under fraud and money laundering.